Why lap times aren't always the most important indicator for dictating whether you need to improve your fitness or not. So I was chatting to a rider the other week with his parents who was an enduro racer, and they were having a look at the lap times for a specific enduro that they were doing. And the laps were about within 30 minutes, so half an hour range, so reasonable length. And what they were looking at is like the consistency of the laps. And so the rider was saying that he was having these different things breaking down with his body or things that weren't working properly. And then they were looking at the lap times and saying like, well, the lap times were, fairly consistent. They weren't dropping off that much. For motocross, so first of all, that's a little bit of insight into what we're going to get into today. But the thing that's important with that is with motocross, you can compare the lap times and you can look at it and go, all right, it would be fair to say that the lap times are going to get slower as the day gets on because the track gets rougher. The difference between motocross and enduro though, is motocross, you're going to be able to remember the whole track. Because the track are like say 2 minutes in length, you're going to be able to remember the whole track, what corner's coming up next, what are the best lines, how the track's breaking down because it's such a short track, you can remember it and it's all up here. Whereas for an enduro, it's very different. Because the laps are so long, and especially if you're doing more of like a destination race, so let's say like you're doing Finke in comparison to say doing Hattah, you're not going to remember that whole track unless you've done it hundreds of times and done heaps and heaps of pre-running or ridden that track a lot. You're not going to remember what's coming up next. So when you go and do an enduro event and you haven't seen the track before and it's been marked out specifically for that event, what's going to happen is as you get through the day, you're going to be more and more confident in the track and in yourself because you know what the track's like. You know what to expect, you know what's coming up, you remember more and more parts of it. So even though the track might be getting rougher because everyone's been doing that same loop for so long, your ability to be able to ride it harder actually increases as the day goes on because you know what to expect and you know what's coming up. So sometimes you'll see on an enduro day, the track will get rougher, but your lap times might stay the same, which doesn't really make sense. If that was a motocross environment, it definitely wouldn't make sense, but that's the reason why. So when you're looking at enduro, that's not always the primary. Lap times aren't always the primary indicator. The primary indicator is how are you feeling. So if your lap times stayed consistent all the way through for an enduro race, but you know that your legs started to get a little bit sore, you started to fatigue, you got a bit out of breath, it was a bit harder to ride the bike. It doesn't necessarily mean that, yeah, you were going through all those things, but you were still riding at the same speed. You should have actually been getting faster throughout the day. As the track was getting rougher and tougher to ride, you should have been getting better and better and better. Those lap times should have been dropping, even though the track was getting rougher. And that just comes back to self-awareness. It's knowing what your body's feeling. Like, are you getting arm pump? Are you getting out of breath? Are you finding that you're making more mistakes out on the track? And they're things that you need to get on top of, because then if you can get on top of those, then you should have your lap times trending in the opposite way rather than just staying stagnant and aiming for consistency all the way through the day.